So, I wanted to talk about a pretty deep subject. Hope I can put it into words right. And it fundamentally deals with time. Again, talking about time. Because I think this is something people have a hard time reconciling. The concept of time and what it really means. And of course, when we talk about time, which mostly is when humans talk about time, they're talking about their ability to mentally project into the future or the past, which are really virtual simulations happening in your mind. Really, there is no time because there's just the moment. But through change, through the fact that we have a memory and we can measure change, that's where time arises. I learned this from studying physics, that time doesn't arise until you measure a location of a point or an object in one location, and then it changes and it's in another location. You need time to explain that. That's where time arises, is in change. Time equals change in a way. But with our ability to project either into the past or into the future, if you project into the future far enough, then you have to deal with the concept of death. And this is a fundamental concept that people have a hard time reconciling. Most people don't. Most people just repress this. And they don't really think about it that much. Most people have all kinds of coping mechanisms to avoid dealing with it and avoid thinking about it, and so much in human behavior comes down to this attempt to avoid the fact of death and mortality, that maybe we're just here for this little while and then it's going to be all over and you won't even know it and it'll be all gone. And so that kind of thinking can be very frightening, very scary, and it that's where like this nihilistic perspective arises from. Like, well, what does anything matter? If everything I do, everything I learn, everything I achieve, all the thoughts that I think and all these emotions I experience and all my experience will one day just be gone forever, and maybe I won't even be there to know that it's gone, then what does anything I do matter? What does any of this matter? And you see the symptoms of this. You see the symptoms of this way of thinking in human behavior and then consequently in the world. So much of what people do is kind of just grabbing and grasping at things in life, desires and material aspects and sensations and pleasures and experiences, because they're frantically trying to get it all in before they die. If you deal with mortality, you realize it makes all your efforts frantic. You have a finite amount of time to do everything in, and you become very grabbing and grasping and holding on very tightly. It makes all your decisions so pressurized. Oh, should I do this or that? I can't decide, and it really matters because this is I'm only here for 70 years or 80 years, and I might make the wrong decision and waste my time. You see, it makes you very frantic and pressurized. It makes every decision you make like a life or death decision. This may not arise consciously. It may not seem like a life or death decision consciously, but if you're operating from that belief, it is. That's the way you're looking at the world, in this very hardcore, grasping, life or death, black and white, cut and dried finite way, and this is what you're more apt to screw people over if you're like, well, I'm just here for this time, and like I need to get mine, and like after I'm gone it's not gonna matter, so I need to get mine while I can, and who cares, I'm just gonna grab for this and screw these people over. It disconnects you and makes you very frantic. What I want to talk about in this video is, let's just hypothetically talk about. And I say hypothetical because what I'm going to talk about, if there's scientific materialists out there, they're going to reel with horror. And having come from that perspective, in another video I talked about how from earliest I can remember, 3 years old, I had the perspective of a scientific materialist. I only believe in what I can see, what I can empirically observe, or what is explained to me in a way that logically makes sense. All this spiritual stuff is BS as far as I'm concerned, because I can't see it. I don't know what you're talking about. And I talked a little bit about my journey of how I slowly awakened into like a spiritual awakening. Maybe I'll make more videos about this, but my point is that I understand how some of the stuff I might be talking about on this channel is very woo-woo, and it's going to turn a lot of people off. So I preface all of it with hypothetically. And what I want to talk about today is, let's hypothetically just think, what if you're infinite? What if you're infinite? I'm going to add, I've had several experiences in my life, moments in my life, where kind of in a mystical state, I perceived that I was infinite, that I had had countless incarnations, and I remembered them, and that we're all like an aspect of God, and the point of this physical world is that you incarnate into this particular dimension, of which there may be many, and you kind of forget what you are for a minute. Why? Because it's something to do with the time. If that's one thing that immediately will change up your brain when you consider this. If you're infinite, it changes everything. It changes everything. But let's define a little bit what I mean. Hypothetically imagine that you're an infinite consciousness, that you'll never die, that you've been here since the beginning and you'll never die. Well, all that's going to happen, let's say all that happens when you die is you kind of remember, oh yeah, oh, that was a good trip. That was a cool one. I almost forgot for a minute that I'm infinite, that I've been here forever. That was a fun roller coaster ride. I was really, it's like when you go into the movie, the suspension of disbelief, like hopefully you forget that you're sitting in a movie theater watching a screen. You're watching light move around on a screen. You don't want that. You want to get involved in the story, the suspension of disbelief, and you get carried along with the story, and you forget that you're sitting in a movie theater and that all you're watching is light on a screen. Maybe that's what these incarnations are. Maybe that's what your life in this dimension is right now. It's a way to play the game. It's a virtual reality thing to forget, because think about it. If you're an infinite consciousness, like we're all an aspect of God, that gets complex. It's hard to explain what I mean about that, but just imagine you're an infinite consciousness. You've been here since the beginning, and you will be here for countless eons. The first thing you have to deal with is boredom. What are you going to do with all this time? Like, after like a couple billion years, it might get a little boring. So you're going to want to forget the power that you have, and that the fact that you're always going to be around. You're going to want to forget. It makes it more poignant and beautiful if it seems finite. If it seems finite, it makes everything that much more poignant. And you want to savor every little aspect because you've forgotten that you're infinite. That helps deal with the boredom. It helps time pass. If you're going to be around for infinite time, you got to find a way to pass the time, because there's a lot of it. So, and it's interesting what this will do to your mind. And I recommend finding ways to experience this directly. For reference, yoga and those types of practices, meditation, Eastern practices, Western esotericism. There's many, many ways to change your consciousness and kind of experience this state of infinite consciousness and awareness, where time ceases. You step outside of time. If you've never had that experience, I recommend that you seek it, because it can really help. But back to my point, it's interesting what the new perspective that will come from just hypothetically considering this, that you're infinite. So we said, number one, the first thing that arises is like, well, what am I going to do? How do I pass the time? This is going to be boring if I'm going to be around forever. Well, the first thing you might want to say is, well, I'm going to do anything I want. There's no rules then. If I'm infinite, then it doesn't matter. Nothing can happen to me, and I'm going to do whatever I want. Kind of in a debauched way, or in terms of decadence. And hey, you can do that. Many people already do that, but hopefully you'll see that's a dead-end road, and that there's never going to be enough. And don't do it in a destructive way. You can be destructive, but if you follow that all the way out to the end, you'll see, like, what's the point? What is the point? Whether you're destructively grasping after sense pleasures, that's not going to keep you stoked for infinity. That won't even keep you stoked for one day. We see that in people with addictions and with doing stupid stuff to get some kind of dopamine release. It's not even going to keep you stoked for one day. Go buy a new sports car, you'll be stoked for a week. I mean, follow these lines of thought out to their ends and ask what the end result is. And so the beautiful thing that arises when you consider yourself as an infinite being, that maybe this lifetime, this incarnation is not infinite, but you're going to wake up non-physical and realize the entirety of your being, the entirety of your consciousness, and say, oh yeah, now I remember. You're going to take your experiences, and then you're going to decide a new situation to incarnate into and to go on the ride again and forget again and see what you can learn and see what you can happen again. And that's what you start to see when you consider this, that if you have infinite time, what are you going to do? Well, for me, the most interesting thing is to learn and to create, to learn, to observe the beauty in things, observe the complexity, delight in it, delight in everything, and learn. In all your bumping up against other people and conflict, learn in that. And all the negative experiences that happen to you, learn in that. Grow your awareness, grow your concept of the whole thing. And the second thing is creation. That's the best way to pass the time. If you consider yourself as an infinite being, it takes away the pressure of so much life and death struggle in practicality, where maybe you're content to be a pizza driver for 40 years to keep a house over your head and it warm and fed and blah 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 blah. If you consider yourself as an infinite being, the question becomes, well, what do you want to do? You can do anything. Over infinite time, you could create anything. You could create a whole universe. maybe not in this incarnation, but that if you're an infinite being, you have infinite time to figure out how to make that happen. It's all available to you. This is getting way abstract, but this is the fundamental point I wanted to make. Change your perspective. Don't make your life so pressurized and constricted and finite. Allow the moment to expand out into infinity. Yes, you still have to deal with mundane things and meet people at certain times and show up at certain times, and you got to work with the clock and you got to work with the calendar. But more primarily, allow the moment to expand and hypothetically consider that you're an infinite being and you have infinite time. So if you're going to do something, what do you really want to do? What do you want to create? If you have infinite time and you have to fill up the time, probably what you would like to delight in most is creation. To make something new, to manifest a new idea, a new impression, a new thought, to take what you have learned and transmute it, change it around, modify it, and put it back out into the world to create, to make something new. Do this with your life. Apply this principle to your life. Consider yourself as infinite. You have infinite time. You're going to be around for infinity. You've been here for infinity. So you can fill up the time in infinite ways. You can do infinite things. You have infinite number of choices of how you want to pass the time. But the question is, what's the most interesting way to pass the time? In a given moment, what is the most interesting way for you right then to pass your time, to pass your lifetime? And you'll find a whole new world opens up for you. A whole new world of creativity, a whole new world of being in touch with what you really want to experience and explore and learn about and try and play with and manifest. You'll become much more in touch with that because you deconstricted yourself and took yourself out of a finite time lapse when we're frantically running around trying to fit it all in before we kick the bucket. That's no way to live. And if you look at other animal life, they don't live that way. The moment is expanded for them. It's just one moment that's expanded, and they're primarily enjoying. They're enjoying life. They don't walk around thinking about that moment where they're going to be eaten alive by a predator. That's just 5 seconds. That's just a couple seconds of pain. The rest of the time, they're in real-time experiential pleasure of this physical dimension. Allow yourself to do that too. In a given moment, if a stressor is not occurring, or even if you're having to do some mundane responsibility, still allow that moment to expand for infinity. And just as a mental exercise, consider that you have infinite time to do whatever you want, to experience whatever you want, to play with whatever you want, to explore. And dig deep into that and say, what do I really want to do? How do I want to pass the time? How do I want to pass this time? I don't want to do it in a boring way, and after I experienced these states, I could see how blocks, conflict, where people get stuck. They get so stuck, including myself. There's been times in my life where I felt so stuck, so frustrated, so disempowered. And I'm sure people around me were looking at me as like, what are you talking about? It's all in your head. It's all in your head. And you can look at that with people in your life. You look at people who may be down on their luck or doing bad or have some kind of problem or addiction or a bad relationship, And you're like, what's the problem? Just quit it. Just stop. It's not that big of a deal. It's all in your head. Well, I realized after I experienced these like infinite states, these time where I realized that maybe I've been here for a long time, and I will be here for a long time. And that may sound crazy, but it was a state I experienced. I realized that these things, these blocks, these conflicts are a way to stretch out time. They're a way to pass the time. They're a way to pass the time. And this also applies to law of attraction if you talk about manifestation. I happen to believe in the law of attraction, and which is another way of saying magic, that you can use not just your mind. Your mind is a big part of it, but your vibration, your heart, your will, and apply your will either non-physically through some etheric means, but also very much through physical action and decisions and choices and putting something out into the world, that you can manifest things. You can get things that you want, experiences, items, people, whatever. Okay? It's in my observation and experience, it is possible to manifest stuff extremely quickly, like that almost, but within one day. But that can be very jarring to your consciousness, especially if you have certain beliefs, like I talked about in the last video, certain conditioning, where you believe it works one way, or you believe it's hard, or you believe this is unattainable. If you manifest that in one day, that's going to be jarring to your beliefs. It's not in alignment with what your perception of reality is. So people create blockages in their life and places where they're stuck, conflict, hardship, to slow down the manifestation, to extend time out. And from the highest perspective of this infinite being, maybe you're doing that to savor it a little bit more, to savor time, so that when you really get it, whether you get it in this lifetime or the next, it's all that much more worth it and savoring. Because if you have infinite time, stuff can get really boring. And think about it. If your consciousness exists for infinity, everything can get boring. And so what makes it interesting is forgetting. What makes it interesting is forgetting who you are, and it is stretching out time with these challenges and these blocks. If you could just get everything immediately, that's no fun. That's boring. I just create the Mount Everest over here. I just create this whole universe here. I just create another planet over here. Yeah, I'm bored. If you can do it immediately, it's boring. The reason for resistance and challenge and blocks and stuckness is to stretch out time, to pass the time. It's a way to pass the time that makes it interesting. So this is where negativity and things we consider negative, resistance and conflict and frustration and anger, they're actually not completely negative. It's actually beautiful in a way. That's what helps us have richer experiences. That's what helps us learn and grow, and it stretches out the time and enriches the experience throughout time. If everything was happy and good and you get what you want immediately, this would be no place to live. It would be so boring. It is hardship and challenge and struggle. That's what makes it interesting, and that's what makes the good parts that much more savorable. So consider that all your problems are created by you as a way to stretch out time and slow down manifestation. By slowing down manifestation, you are stretching out time, because you have to fill time. If you're an infinite being, you are trying to find ways to fill time. And perhaps that's what all of reality is. Why does this all exist? That's something I talked about in the other video, but consider that. The number one point I want to make with this is, even if you just hypothetically consider that you have infinite time, don't let the fear of death influence you. Don't let the fear of death water down your life and make it so mundane. Sometimes just pretend that you're an infinite being, and if you're an infinite being, you have infinite time. So since you have infinite time, what do you want to do right now? What do you want to right now? You have infinite time. You have plenty of time. What do you want to do right now then? Well, probably what will come up is, what is the most interesting thing to do right now? You know, maybe it's like, if I have infinite time, I don't necessarily have to do anything. And that sounds weird, but think about that for a minute. But what will usually come up is like, what do you want to do right now? Well, what's the most interesting? What's the most in alignment with you? What touches your deepest heart? What do you want to create? You can create your own little world. And you have plenty of time to do it. So just try that exercise. I hope it helps.